Do you want to become a CFO and take control of your career? Our podcast series From Go to CFO will give you a unique insight into what it takes to become a successful CFO. Hosted by the three amigos at AXR Recruitment and Search, myself, Greg O'Shea, and my colleagues Kunal Gupta and Nick Constein, we speak to inspiring and successful CFOs from our network as they share their career journeys with us. It's the closest thing you're going to get to delving into the mind of a CFO. We hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to today's episode of Go to CFO. My name is Nick Constein. I'm the Associate Director here at AXR Recruitment and Search. Today, we are joined by Vladen Potapenkov, Chief Financial Officer at Nutrano Produce Group. Vladen began his career in a comprehensive graduate program at Agrana Fruit, one of the world's largest food ingredient businesses. Over the course of more than 15 years, he held a variety of roles across Europe before relocating to Australia, where he became the CFO for the region. His journey continued with a promotion to finance lead for the Asia-Pacific region. In this episode, we explore Vladen's pathway to CFO, his approach to leadership beyond finance, and how he has driven exceptional outcomes through large-scale system implementations. We also discuss his belief in team leadership, how it's helped stabilize even the most challenging teams, and his passion for mentoring and developing talent. Thanks for joining, Vladen. How are you doing today?
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. So to start off, would you like to just give a bit of an introduction on yourself? Where did you grow up? Tell us about your life.
Yeah, sure.
Your career started.
Yeah, so I was born in the Ukraine, spent my childhood there. Then when I was about 12, relocated to Russia, where I finished the school, went to the uni. So my parents have two distinct careers. So my dad was a military officer, and it was one choice potentially for myself, or my mom was a banking manager, so it was a second choice. At the end, I decided to pursue the career in finance like my mom did.
Yeah, fantastic. And so in terms of your career, can you just give everyone a little bit of a high-level career summary?
Yeah, so 20 years in food and beverage globally, initially in Europe, in Russia, Austria, in the global head office, then relocated to Australia, then the assignment within the APAC region. After 15 years in a global business, I changed to a private PE-backed business, industrial components, and then now fruit again. So out of 20 years, 19 years in fruit to be precise.
Yeah, amazing. And so fresh out of college, how did you approach looking for that new role? I guess what attracted to your role at Agrana?
Yeah. Look, when you're 21 or 20, you don't think of, I didn't do any particular studies. Actually, what I was driven by is to actually practice my German. So I did a dual degree in both in finance and linguistics. And once I heard from my friends at the uni that there's a company recruiting students with German skills, I applied. And after a few interviews, they told me that they would consider me for a controlling department. I had no idea what controlling in Europe means. I thought it has to do with controlling some fruit in production. So I still was quite keen. And then I was offered a role, and it turned out that controlling in Europe actually means FP&A.
Yeah, amazing. Mm-hmm. And so I guess to give the listeners a bit of context, what do Agrana Fruit do?
So Agrana is it's a food ingredient company which primarily acts in the B2B space. It's one of the leading manufacturers of sugar and starch in Europe, and worldwide it's probably it's the largest food solution provider to confectionery, dairy, food service industries, supplying companies like Chobani, Lion, Danone, Unilever, McDonald's.
Yeah. So it's massive. I did some research, and I think people don't realize it's probably one of the largest in their space. So I'd say globally.
Yes, correct. Yeah. When it comes to fruit solutions, it's a clear number one worldwide and present on all 5 continents.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you started off in the graduate program and you rotated through quite a few different roles. And then as that came to an end, you were promoted to financial controller. Why do you think that happened? What was the kind of outcome of that?
I think what worked well is I managed to demonstrate that I can get along with people. I am very interested in what I did. And it was a very sharp learning curve. And you just deal with challenges with new projects you're presented with. And if you are lucky to have very strong people, very good patrons who believe in yourself, they help you open the right doors.
Yeah. Did you have someone who sponsored you internally? Did you feel there was people?
Certainly, there were probably 4 or 5 people along my career who really helped me. And when I say helped, they just provided the right advice. And when there was an opening at an internal development program, they put my name. When there was an opportunity to change to a new role, instead of holding me back, they told me go for it and support it.
I think it's an understated comment on people's journey, because it's sometimes you have to just back yourself and go for it, and other people see it in you, but you don't see it yourself to some degree.
Correct. Yeah. It's very important you also just put up your hand and you demonstrate. I think the genuine interest in the business and your role, it's very important. It's very hard to be successful if you don't enjoy. Yeah. And I think if you show continuously the interest in the broader business, in your role, and people around you see it, and you perform on your role, of course, then...
Yeah. And so the first 6 years you worked in the non-headquartered office.
Yes.
And then you made the move to the headquarters in Vienna.
Yep.
How did your perception change when you moved to Vienna and worked in the headquarters?
It was quite an eye-opener. First of all, I was expecting to discover a secret formula which head office people would use to analyze various subsidiaries. I had a perception that they're kind of superior or more sophisticated. In reality, probably I never found this formula. It was a completely different game over there. It's more about a big picture. It's more about corporate reporting, observing how big decisions are prepared, high exposure to projects which you would not be part of at a subsidiary level, for example, M&A projects, and policies, procedures, how to look at performance of individual subsidiaries through their eyes. So it's a lot less about technical skills, but more about business performance skills.
Yeah. And so in that time, did you have any significant projects you think that kind of helped you later down the road?
Certainly, my time there in Vienna, so when I reflect on this, it's mostly about projects. Yeah, so it's reporting and projects, and we had several very interesting M&A initiatives. Some of them, actually, most of them didn't eventuate it. Yeah. But when it comes to, for example, due diligence projects around farming businesses, which Agrana was looking to acquire in Southern Europe, in Indonesia, were very interesting. So constructing the business cases, which I never ended up presenting because it was a job of other people, but just opportunity to be involved in constructing those cases, collecting the required information, and understanding what's actually required for such a big investment to be considered by the supervisory board. That was really useful and interesting.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating. I think M&A is such an interesting way to learn about your industry and how competitors and or suppliers operate. Mm-hmm. And I think that gives you a really great visibility in comparison to maybe when you're in a satellite or a different office, you don't get to see how the mechanics of that function.
Correct. Yeah. You don't learn, for example, if you want to learn activity-based costing or inventory planning, this is not what you're going to learn at head office. It's probably you need to pick up those things at a subsidiary. Mm-hmm. So I think both experience at both levels is very important because they're different.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the move to Australia. So how did that happen?
Look, after about 3 years, I realized I was ready for my next step. And I actually went to my boss, the divisional CFO, and I had a chat about it with him. It's very important, I think, just to voice that you want to step up, because sometimes, even nowadays, you observe people who probably had some ambition but never voice it. I think it was very important to record my interest. And then actually within 6 months, there was an ad on the company intranet. I picked it up, went straight to the HR department and asked, can you see it working? I said, why not? Go for it. Then went to the office of my wife. She actually worked with me, and we Googled Sydney, and nice views of Sydney popped up. And she also said, just let's go for it. So then I had a few interviews. But then that was a very important decision when I was actually invited to come to Australia to one of the interviews, one of the final interviews with a local team. Someone told me, make sure you grab your wife. And because if your partner doesn't like the relocation, and by that time we had settled very well in Vienna. Our daughter went to childcare. We had friends. It was a very comfortable life there. And it was a big risk and disruption to relocate from a good position in a good country to a country where you have never been. Yeah. So we traveled together to Australia. She endorsed, and I literally took my wife on a journey with myself. And I think it was a very important factor. Now she loves it here.
Yeah, of course. It's amazing. And Vienna is an absolutely amazing city. So I can see how leaving a beautiful place that you feel pretty settled in is difficult, particularly when you've never been and it's on the other side of the world, which makes it.
Absolutely.
So personally, how was that like with the transition to coming to Australia?
Yeah, it was a big step up. the key mission of my role was to integrate the subsidiary in Australia into the global family in terms of IT, finance, HR. And even though I was fairly confident with the finance aspect of it, because I came from the head office and knew reporting requirements in this space, I think the challenge which was presented to me with IT and more importantly, actually with building my first team was quite hard.
Yeah.
So probably the advantage I had is that I knew the people, I knew who to speak to. I was very honest that I had never managed IT, and I never hesitated requesting advice, requesting help.
Yeah.
So in brief, my challenge was to integrate, to put in place first Active Directory company domain here, redesign the network, and prepare the company in terms of infrastructure for SAP migration 1 year later.
Yeah.
And the IT team function didn't exist here. It was completely outsourced. So I had to build my knowledge in this space basically from zero. And unfortunately, the first migration to Active Directory failed. I had to change IT manager. Second was better. It worked out. And then 1 year later, when it got down to SAP migration, it was a very good project. And also with people, I think most of my now reflecting on my hiring experience, probably the worst hiring decisions I've made were during my first couple of years.
Yeah.
And again, of course, you attended certain trainings before that, and sure. You probably knew some theory, but actually deciding yourself and making these typical mistakes in terms of prioritizing someone's performance versus someone's character, or relying on very experienced staff versus compromising on their ability to change, to adapt to the new system.
Yeah, okay.
What typical examples of what actually I didn't realize, and I made those mistakes.
Yeah. And I think almost that those mistakes are so valuable in themselves. You know, you learn so much by the things you don't do correctly, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you reflect and you don't want to repeat your mistakes twice.
Sure.
But it was a bumpy road. And of course, I always reflect on sometimes your experience is the one you don't want to repeat again.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what were the cultural differences coming from Europe? How did you find the cultural differences in a work setting here in Australia?
So first of all, I think it's easier to adapt coming from Europe to Australia probably than the other way.
Yeah.
Number one, people here are a lot closer to each other. So even when you deal with authorities, with regulators, they address you by your first name. They're reasonable. Just interaction amongst people is a lot closer, less formal.
Okay.
In Europe, for example, if you're in a German-speaking environment, you need to deserve the right to be called by your first name. Normally, you'll be called by your last name.
Interesting.
Number two, I sensed, and my personal impression, people here are more family-oriented, and it reflects on their desire to spend more time with the families. During my first year, I really left my office before 7, 8 p.m. because there was numerous IT migrations, lots of work. Whereas some of my team members clocked off at 5 p.m. even during some very intense parts of the projects, and it was really confronting. But over time, I learned to deal with it. Yeah. So overall, I think here Australians have a more balanced life, and their relationship with work is not as close as in Europe.
And did that change the way you had to manage people in terms of how you interacted with them?
Yeah, I learned to accept it. I learned to deal with it. And certainly you still have plenty of people who really like spending more time in the office, and it depends on very much on your stage of your career. But yeah, it just increased my awareness. And you still have excellent access to talent here in Australia. It's not a limitation at all. You just need to be mindful of it.
Okay. And so your first CFO role was in a completely different region of the world. How do you navigate that shift and manage the transition personally? Are you, like you said, you leaning on people, you're asking for help? What does that look like in terms of practical?
Yeah. First of all, the people who promoted me, my immediate and most important patrons. And I'm still very thankful to them for the autonomy they provided to me and allowance to make some errors. I think the realization of what was really mission critical was very important. So those migrations, building your first team, getting the support from your manager who you need to hire, if you need to make certain changes with deadlines, with project milestones. I think the support of my boss in Australia and in Vienna were very helpful. But yeah, as I said, just learning who to contact and not to have this ego to hesitate requesting help is very important. If you're upfront front, you don't know, but you're keen to learn, I think there are plenty of people who will assist you.
Yeah. And I think they'd rather that than the opposite, where you're
Yes.
not asking for help and then you're drowning.
Correct.
Yeah. And that could be quite difficult to manage. Yeah. And so 15 years at Agrana, and then you've moved into a business that's completely different.
Yes.
So what was that like?
It was a cold shower. Of course, like at Legend, I was hired primarily because of my SAP skills. And to give an example, I had to deal with elements of a system for which I had never had access permissions in my previous organization. So there was certainly a lot less structure in terms of all gates were open. In terms of sophistication of systems and process, it was a different level. It's probably very hard to start your career in a setting like that. On the other hand, if you know what you're doing, if you know what the good looks like, this environment can be very enjoyable because it's a lot less bureaucratic. You can undertake a lot more change initiatives in a year than in any big organization.
Yeah, of course. Red tape everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was the fun side of it. So again, you run very fast. Many initiatives are false. But it's a feature. It's not a bug. But you get exposure to many things at a lot faster pace.
Yeah. So then you were there for about a year?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And then, they were private equity backed. And then your current role, so accepting the role at Nutrano, is another private equity backed business, but in a very similar or familiar feel. What was that like moving? Yeah,
it was a landing at a known territory because on the one hand, it was fruit again, and in a PE-backed setting. That was something which on the one hand was very familiar. I think the challenge overall was magnified by the year I started there. It was the peak of COVID. And in the industry, which heavily relies on exports, where 60% of your revenue goes overseas, when you lose track of your containers, where they are, you don't know where customers are going to pay to you. I had to rebuild the team from scratch, finish an ERP implementation. So all together and all of this in a very seasonal business with cash flows with high variance, that was particularly challenging.
Yeah. So what did Nutrano do?
So Nutrano is one of the leading fresh produce growers in Australia. So grow a vertically integrated business which farms, packs, and distributes citrus and tropical fruit. So lemons, mandarins, oranges, mangoes, and distributes them to national retailers, wholesale, and many export markets.
Yeah. And the presence is across Australia. There's
in 4
farms.
states, Northern Territories, Queensland, and Victoria, and sales right across all states, and about 20 export markets.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So how do you, going back to the SAP side, I know you'd mentioned in our conversation previously, that you had multiple kind of goes at an SAP implementation or doing different projects with that. How do you think that set you up for coming into a place where there's obviously a lot going on and you had to do an ERP implementation? How do you think that those experiences set you up?
It's great experience. Initially, when I first was involved in it, when I was 21, during my first couple of years at Agrana, it took me actually years to realize what I did, because I remember very well what I did. But it took me years to realize how important what those steps actually meant. I remember I was reflecting on this and actually realized that for how different the adaptation to the new system was for the younger cohort of the organization, like for myself, for us, it was fun. We were dealing with it and really embracing this. Whereas for more experienced members of the team, it was a different story. It was a lot more challenging, there was a lot more resistance, a lot more. Sure. And this is what made me think that when you're young, you're trying to gain more experience, but actually lack of experience actually also your advantage, because you embrace things a lot easier. Yeah. Whereas when you're experienced, you have years of experience, but sometimes it can be also a disadvantage because you say you have this experience trap. When I became a project manager of SAP implementation in Australia, it was a different stage of my career, and it was a very well organized and delivered project. And of course, I shouldn't discount the huge support which I enjoyed from the head office. Because, for example, right now, my current role, we undergo a migration to a business central system, and I need to deal with external vendors. And of course, it's different compared to relying on a strong IT team within your organization. Yeah. But again, the probably core experience there and key learning was an opportunity to dive into areas which are well outside the traditional domain of a finance person. When you need to dive into how quality control works, how warehousing works, how locations and lot management is organized. It's not something which you would learn as a CFO day to day. But when you deliver an ERP project, you're really confronted to deal and learn the aspects of the business which otherwise you would never have access to, or how integration with POCs, with equipment on the line works, with data interchanges. Something which you would say you would never become an expert in, but it gives you a wonderful overview of the entire business.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the point that I'd like to ask more questions around is the actual change management piece. And how do you go about doing that? Because I think a lot of people will say a similar topic, let's say, hey, look, the younger crowd will adopt. The older crowd or the resistant crowd are going to be pretty hard. So what tips would you give someone who's going through that process now of how do you go about the change management piece?
I think our listeners know the theory. I think it's lots of books written about the theory, and I just probably would draw more on my own experience. I think one thing which I learned myself is to never overestimate of what you have already communicated. So you would probably have sent lots of memos and announcements about a certain change. In reality, people rarely read them, and you need to rely on multitude of channels how to communicate. It shouldn't be just online, or it should be a combination of posters. It should be town halls, meetings online meetings delivered by various people in the organization to ensure the penetration of what gets changed. Quite often, after you have sent numerous memos, you realize there are people who still are surprised that something is changing. Number one. Number two, I think it's certainly the over-reliance of high experience. If you have some members of the team who you'd say they're custodians of the past, they're custodians of experience, and maybe you should keep them for longer. I think this aspect my experience was overestimated. In reality, what's more important is just willingness to embrace curiosity towards a new system. I found this to be more important than just experience with the business as such. Yeah, and of course, the persistence. Quite often, projects are finished at the go-live stage. You celebrate, you think job is done, but in reality, the importance of the second year after the go-live is, in my view, is just as important as the preparation to the go-live. Because during your first year after implementation, where this is a time when all issues come to surface, and if you are able to deal with them, when you still have high mobilization of resources, this is when you really make sure that users, all departments really get the product which can service them, instead of leaving those problems aside and hoping you'll deal with them one day. First year is really critical, and I tend not to release the team, a project team, for at least like 3-6 months after the go live. For example, we went live with a business center in finance in March this year, and we still have fortnightly meetings where we collect feedbacks from various departments, and we still have a run list with outstanding issues 6 months after the go live. I think this is what took me also years to came to this approach.
Yeah. Do you think having the experience of where you're managing both finance and technology gives you a leverage point where that you can integrate more efficiently as opposed to having a separate team that runs, like a CTO who runs it?
Yeah, I was very lucky, and actually that my remit over the last 10 years had consistently included other areas of the business beyond finance. I think there are huge synergies between finance and IT, finance and procurement, S&OP. Nowadays, every project in finance is an IT project. Number one. Number two, like with procurement, the category management, inventory management has a direct impact on finance.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, just as a finance professional, there's lots of talk about business partnering and finance being commercial. I think the best way for a finance department, for a finance leader to become commercial is actually to take over the management of a cross-functional project or a function. In addition to, of course, very important leverage during major IT transformations where it's a different thing managing a team a cross-functional team where basically everyone reports to yourself versus a team where you need to spend additional time aligning with other stakeholders.
Sure.
And while the latter is unavoidable, it still gives you higher speed.
Yeah.
And certainly, as I mentioned earlier, it gives you a wonderful opportunity to learn the business model, learn how company operates to provide additional value. So I'm really convinced that it's a great thing. Of course, it depends on the size. I think
scale makes a difference.
I think if you're a mid-size business, it works perfectly. Of course, if you're a large enterprise, different story. But in mid-size, large enterprises, I think it's a great thing.
Yeah. So I'm sure as your career progressed, your definition of success has changed. And I would imagine that when you're young, you're trying to make an impact and that looks different than what it is now. What does that mean to you and how has that changed over time?
So today I would define this as a sense of progress and positive impact you have on the people you work with and the organization you work for. It has evolved over time. You have multiple tracks in your life, and this is how I look at this. So you have your career, you have your family, your friends, your health, and you don't want to succeed on one track and fail completely on others. So you probably want to make it to the end where all tracks performed well. And this is what I have learned over time, is just to be mindful that career is an important track, but it's just one of several tracks.
And so how do you go about actually doing that? Or I guess, how do you balance your life outside of your work?
I think it's very important to just have interests and taking time for interests outside of your work. So I think your family is a natural direction. So if you have kids, your family, your wife, I think support from your partner, happy kids is very important. So if you have issues there, it will have an impact on your career as well.
Okay.
I think as you get a little bit older, you realize the importance of energy and maintaining the good level of energy to perform at work. And you can do this just by stressing your body, doing sports. So I think regular exercising, and probably it's a everyone understands the importance of this, but I think having this routine and discipline. I have a few mates. My approach is participate in team sports because it builds a natural commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. You're committed at that point. Yeah.
I tried to swim and to run by myself and didn't last long. But as soon as I found friends who I cycle with, I really miss a weekend without cycling. I'm equally committed to a team, and I play basketball twice a week just because of this commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, the staying up to date. I understand that once you are at the top, there are not many people who would give you an advice on what to do, what system to look at, or how to innovate. I think you need to become a thought leader in your organization. And I try to maintain a good pace in terms of reading and just learning experiences, which I commit to a year. So I try to read about 5-10 books a year and have a certain plan in terms of what I want to study. And it just gives me this confidence that I'm on top of current things.
Yeah. And I think that comment about being on the top, lonely at the top, that's a common phrase used, in CFOs. What would you say to someone who's starting their first CFO job on Monday? What piece of advice would you give them in terms of feeling that loneliness at the top? How would you combat that, or what would you suggest for them to do?
So first of all, when you start your career, two things. Number one, try to, whenever you have a choice, try to work for happy people. Of course, maybe it's an illusion to have a choice, to be presented with a choice to choose your boss. But of course, happy people with a balance in their life who feel fulfilled, accomplished, will take you further. I'm convinced in this, and reflecting on the span of my career, I probably have had 12 bosses, and the really good ones were those who were just happy, balanced, accomplished people. That's number one. Number two, as you're young, you'll see that at a certain stage, your skill set, your experience will develop rapidly, and you may feel that your remuneration, for example, might fall behind. And it's very important not to handle this properly. And if your request to adjust your RAM is rejected, you might think, oh, maybe I should change my role, or I shouldn't work as hard. It's very important and the best advice I get in this space actually is to never adjust your effort and to ensure you always, what I call credit balance. So you deliver more than you get, and working on the basis that you're surrounded by reasonable people. So your remuneration will catch you up over time.
Yeah.
So having this persistence, thinking long term, and manage those distractions in a wise way, it's very important to maintain a good trajectory on your career, because there are too many temptations why you just may choose to leave the organization. And in my experience, I had a few temptations and I handled them okay. And that's why this journey at Agrana presented so many wonderful opportunities to myself.
Yeah. That's brilliant advice. And I'm glad we recorded that. I'm going to play that to every single candidate that comes to complain about their salary, because I think it's absolutely spot on. That's a great way to end the episode. So just wanted to say thank you so much, Vladen. That was fantastic. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoyed the insights from our network of inspiring finance leaders as they share their journey from Go to CFO. If you're looking to make the next move in your finance career or build your team, get in contact with the team at AXR Recruitment and Search today. We're passionate about building careers, not jobs, teams, not just hires. If you enjoyed the episode, hit the like button and subscribe today. See you next time.